Good afternoon. My name is Anindya Sinha, and I work at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, India. I wanted to start by thanking the organizers for this wonderful opportunity that I have received to speak to you. And today I will talk to you a bit about our work on interspecies communication in a Synurbising forest of southern India. Non-human life has traditionally coexisted rather peacefully with human communities across the Indian subcontinent for centuries. The two primary reasons that seem to underlie the development of this harmonious relationship have been the spirituality that is believed to be shared between humans and non-human beings, and the exalted positions that many of the non-human life forms have held in the religious beliefs of different Indian communities. This splendid coexistence from times immemorial has also promoted rather sincere efforts by many human communities to reach out to various species with which they have shared their lives, to understand them, speak and write about them, represent them in their various daily activities, including formal performances, as you see here, if not directly communicate with them. And nowhere is this more elegantly evidenced than in some of our traditional arts. This is a wonderful example of a poem that unusually portrays the unconscious, impulsive communication between two non human species, but with the silent, passive presence of the human between them. Let me just read it out for you. When the monkey on the bough of the jackfruit tree in the town's commons mistakes for fruit the eye on the thronged drumheads hung up there by mendicant bards, taps on it, and the sound rouses the male swans below to answering song. It's a very evocative poem, but what is most remarkable is that the poet, whose name was Muthu Mochiar, lived in the Tamil Sangam period, a certain period of South Indian literature, but almost 2000 years ago. And so, for thousands of years, we've had non human primates who have lived in the town's commons in close association with us, and yet we know so little about them. Amongst wild species, non human primates appear to be the closest to us, both emotionally and spiritually, inviting an intimacy that could possibly be founded on our close evolutionary relationships. The macaques represent arguably the most adaptable and evolutionarily successful of all Indian primates and include within them two particular species, the rhesus macaque of northern India and the bonnet macaque endemic to peninsular India, which Flavel Richard and his co-workers have termed the weed macaques. These two species exhibit a remarkable ability to successfully adapt to almost any kind of environment, both natural and anthropogenic, display an inherent tendency to gravitate towards human habitations, and establish in the process close commensal relationships with different human communities. But most importantly, they set into motion an inexorable process of what we call synurbization or urbanization of their life worlds. We have been studying wild bonnet macaques for close to 3 decades now and have discovered that a certain population of the species that lives in typically large multi-male, multi-female associations in the Bandipur Mudumalai national parks of southern India have evolved in recent years a fairly high proportion of a unique social formation. These are unimale, multi-female troops, and they have unique demographic and behavioral features. Food provisioning by tourists visiting these sanctuaries and the ensuing aggressive competition between individuals within these groups for the newly available rich human food resources may have led to the evolution of this social organization, which is unique but ultimately devastating for this population. What is most significant is that the simple, apparently benevolent, spiritually driven act of feeding monkeys, an act that is considered virtuous by most Indians, has profoundly influenced the socio-ecology of this macaque population at two organizational levels, that of the society and the individual. Now, what I show here in this flow chart is this process of social change. Provisioned food from tourists is typically rich and clumped and leads to increased feeding competition between females, particularly in their troops. This intense competition seems to have led, in turn, to a new phenomenon of group fission, where females, either individually or in small groups, have started leaving their natal troops to establish new groups and new home ranges in the vicinity. Now, these small groups of females are then taken over by a single male, and this seems to have led to a monopolization of reproduction by this male and a unique unimale social organization. Now, whether it is the phenotypic flexibility of males or opportunism or perhaps natural selection for aggressive individuals is something that we don't know very well yet, but we are looking into. Most tragically, however, these behavioral changes, especially in the life history strategies of the affected Synurbising individuals, now appears to undermine the survival of this population itself. Wild troops of this population are hardly met with anymore in the forests. They all seem to have moved out and they line the roads and the highways, which we call ethologizing infrastructures, waiting hopefully for their food to arrive from passing vehicles and their occupants. Many of these now terrestrial individuals themselves become food for predators like leopards, who find them easy to detect and catch as they are on the roads most of the time. But many of them also die under the wheels of their benefactors as they dash about, crazed in their search for the smallest of morsels being thrown out of the uncaringly kind vehicle windows. But what I wanted to talk to you today, more importantly, is a most unexpected change that seems to have occurred in the aftermath of these social and behavioral nature nurture transformations. And this is of individual macaques in affected groups who have now begun to directly communicate with their benefactors. This has taken the form of a novel, affectual food requesting behavior directed towards food bearing tourists visiting the sanctuary and unusually successfully resulting in food being thrown at the macaques. What makes this communication, which has never ever been reported for any wild monkey population anywhere in the world, what makes this unique is that it is invariably directed only towards another primate species, humans, and never towards any conspecific individual within the group or outside. Let me show you a brief sequence from our natural observations of this novel communicative behavior. I do hope you were able to hear the very soft coo and and able to see the hand raising that this juvenile exhibited during the interaction. This communication is unique because it is multimodal in nature and typically includes, as I mentioned, a very newly evolved gesture of raising an arm towards the humans. This is accompanied by a soft coo call, which is rarely used otherwise, and a visually mediated orientating behavior that allows the macaque to lock gaze with the human benefactor while the individual continuously monitors the response of the human. All of these are performed intentionally and with the hand extension gesture, possibly even referentially. There are various criteria that have been laid out to qualify a communicative signal to be intentional, and I've listed them here. These include: one, the social use of the communicative act as indicated by the signal being directed to particular recipients, modified by various factors such as the presence or composition of the attendant audience. Two, the sensitivity of the signaler to the attentional states of the recipients. Three, the manipulation of the attentional states of recipients, particularly when a joint visual attention state may be missing between the signaler and the recipient. 4, monitoring the responses of the audience. And 5, persistence in the production and or the elaboration of the signal until the desired communicative goal is met. The application of these criteria to the novel primate communication behavior that we see reveals that these are truly intentional signals. As an aside, let me mention here that we have also now documented such intentional gestural communication, but in a different context, directed by monkeys towards members of their own species as well. But, and these observations came up during our long-term studies, of which this particular study has also been a part. Let me, however, now return to the two most remarkable of the signals directed exclusively towards humans by our macaques. The hand extension gesture was produced by the monkeys only when there was a joint visual attention state between the macaque and the human recipient, as evaluated in terms of the two subjects exhibiting complete body orientation towards one another. The use of the coo call by our study macaques when requesting food from humans appears to be an entirely novel application of a well-known macaque vocal signal. This call has traditionally been observed to serve as a signal to maintain auditory contact or group cohesion in macaques. Woo! That would be the call they would give when they're separated from their group mates. We believe that the possible function of the coo call, now much softer, coo, coo, is perhaps only exhibited in the context of food requesting. It could serve to attract the visual attention of the human subjects during this interaction, or as a signal to express the macaque's intent to acquire food held by the humans, or even as one that simply serves to maintain persistent contact of the signaling individuals with their human audience. This gesture could thus function to express the internal motivational state of the actor or respond to the external events experienced by her, or both. At a more general level, however, the effectual nature of the signal and its effect on its intended audience is unquestionable. The performance of the hand extension gesture of the macaques also provides evidence of it being a potentially referential gesture. A referential communicative signal, by definition, is produced during a joint attention state of the actor and the target, and allows for the actor to draw the attention of the audience to a third external entity. This gesture is only produced when the actor macaque was able to lock gaze with a particular human audience, and we thus believe that this hand extension gesture served to attract the attention of the target human to a third entity, the food item being held by the human. Our conclusion that the novel hand extension gesture of the bonnet macaque is indeed a referential gesture is also supported by our recent demonstration of the capacity of this population of bonnet macaques to use referential gestures even amongst themselves during social interactions such as allo grooming. And this, incidentally, is also the first report of the use of referential gestures by any non-ape species in the wild, and which I have referred to earlier. Now, it may be important here to speculate on the possible origins of this novel behavioral performance in the species. In general, primates rarely share food actively with conspecific individuals and are more likely to aggressively defend food resources from them. Adult bonnet macaques in Bandipur rarely displayed this food requesting behavior while interacting with food holding humans. They either opportunistically snatched the food away or aggressively threatened their human targets, the latter often being an effective strategy to induce their targets to throw away the food. Juvenile macaques of the kind that you saw in the video, however, have to depend on alternative foraging strategies, such as effectual food requesting, particularly given their small body size and general fear of humans. The opportunity to request food from humans could have thus potentially given rise to the co-option of the soft coo call, which they traditionally produce when separated from their troops, as well as the development of a new gesture, that of hand extension, in this novel context. It is entirely possible that initially certain individuals could have acquired this gesture from simply reaching out with their forelimbs for the food that was held by the humans. This behavior could then have become reinforced and ritualized when positively rewarded for by human beings who may have been either effectually or emotionally driven to respond to this appeal. It is also important to note that this successful behavioral strategy appears to have then spread by social learning mechanisms such as social facilitation or emulation within the population. Our observation that this particular behavioral performance arose independently in another geographically separate population also suggests that perhaps for bonnet macaques, given their unparalleled social flexibility and adaptability, may even be genetically predisposed to combine communication signals of different modalities in order to achieve an intentional goal. They have learned to perhaps develop, refine, and learn a fairly complex directed communicative strategy from one another, and they can then use this at will over their lifetimes. Finally, our earlier studies have shown that macaques seem to be capable of forming mental representations generated by direct personal experience, and this capacity apparently underlies their interactions with both the mechanical as well as the social components of their immediate environment. These observations suggest a rather early evolutionary origin for fairly sophisticated cognitive capabilities characterized by an objectified self with limited regulatory control over more subjective levels of self-awareness in this species. These insights and our recent understandings of performance and performativity in gender theory allows us to consider the food requesting actions of the macaques as iterated bodily practices or performances by agential individuals that produce tangible material effects. These performances thus emerge within a specific location, a natural cultural contact zone where humans and non-humans encounter and relate to one another through specific exchanges of signals and materials. The gradually Synurbising forests of Bandipur thus become a fertile and heterogeneous borderland where relationships between two phylogenetically related species are improvised and eventually ritualized within very unequal relations of power. Furthermore, we visualize that the performativity of the individual actors engaged in this relational practice leads to the co-creation of new forms of subjectivity within these changing spaces of interaction, a feature that we'll possibly repeatedly encounter with other non-humans too in the Anthropocene. I conclude with a hope that perhaps we may then be able to transcend the human exceptionalism built into the behavioral ecology approach of understanding non-human species and reconceptualize the macaques as subjects in an intersubjective negotiation with humans. This is a reorientation, that we believe is an urgent imperative. Do these performances that I talked to you about then embody the macaques' desperate, effectual bid to cope with the loss of their habitats and their resources to a far more powerful species, a final act of negotiation with a world that may be quietly slipping away from their grasp? Thank you. Thank you very much.